After shielding a puppy from the clan's assault, the alpha claimed her as his Luna hours later. The forest was quiet, but not empty. Mist clung to the twisted trunks of ancient trees, curling around their roots like pale fingers. Moonlight pierced the fog in silver streaks, illuminating the narrow paths that wound through the shadows. Arya walked softly, her steps careful but unsteady, each footfall stirring the damp earth. She carried a small bundle in her arms, a blanket wrapped around something warm and trembling. Inside, a puppy whimpered, its tiny body shaking. Arya had found it an hour ago, alone and frightened, at the edge of the forest where the clans often clashed. Its fur was matted with blood and mud, and its eyes reflected a fear that mirrored her own. She had wrapped it as best she could, murmuring soothing words she had learned from her mother. Words meant to heal, words meant to calm the chaos of the world. But tonight the chaos had not left. A sudden rustle in the trees made her freeze. The wind shifted, carrying with it a whisper of menace. Arya's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to flee. She had survived on her own for years, and she would not abandon the tiny life trembling in her arms. The forest was dangerous, yes, but she was not defenseless. From the shadows emerged three figures. They moved with the silent certainty of predators, clad in dark leathers and masks that hid their faces. Even in the dim moonlight, Arya could see the glint of steel in their hands. They were hunters of the rival clan, the ones who had slaughtered without mercy in villages near and far, and now they had found her. "Drop it," one of them commanded, his voice low and cruel. "The Alpha will not forgive you taking what belongs to the forest." Arya's grip tightened around the puppy. Her mind raced. There were no villagers nearby to help, no soldiers of the kingdom patrolling these woods. She had only herself, and the strange, wild energy that had always simmered just beneath her skin. "I will not harm him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let me go." A cruel laugh echoed through the mist. The leader stepped forward, blade raised. "And why should we listen to a weak human?" Arya's chest tightened. She was not a warrior, but she had something stronger than fear. Something born of desperation, courage, and a determination to protect life, no matter how small. She whispered a chant, old and secret, learned from scrolls and herbs, and felt a warmth spreading from her hands into the puppy's blanket. Its body ceased trembling. The warmth in her hands flowed outward, brushing the hunters with a faint, almost invisible resistance. They faltered, instinctively recoiling, and that pause was all she needed. Arya's fingers brushed over a hidden dagger at her belt, and she struck with precise, swift movements. One fell, the others stumbled back. She ran, darting between trees and leaping over roots that threatened to trip her. The puppy whimpered but did not resist. It trusted her. Branches clawed at her face, the mist thickened, and the forest seemed alive, as if it had taken notice of her defiance. Shadows danced, twisting into shapes of beasts only half imagined. But she did not stop. She could not. She thought of the stories her mother had told her, the stories of the alphas, the leaders of clans, creatures of strength and shadow who ruled with law and fear. She had never believed she would meet one. Yet, in the very next moment, she did. A figure emerged from the mist so suddenly that she almost stumbled into him. His presence was commanding, like the forest itself had bent to his will. His eyes glinted silver in the moonlight, and his movements were smooth, deliberate, impossible to ignore. He was tall, broad, with dark hair that fell in wild strands around his face. Even in the shadows there was a magnetism to him, an aura of danger and authority that made her pulse quicken despite herself. He spoke only a single word: "Stop." It was not a request. It was a command, deep and resonant, and the air seemed to thrum with it. Arya froze, clutching the puppy. Her legs trembled, but her mind remained sharp. She had faced death before. Tonight would not be different. "I do not mean you harm," she said cautiously. "This is just a small life, a creature who does not belong to any clan. Please let me go." His gaze swept over her, piercing and unreadable. He lowered a hand slightly as if weighing her courage against her fear. "You are bold," he said finally, his voice like velvet draped over steel. "Few dare face my enemies alone." "Why?" Arya's lips trembled. She could feel the weight of his presence pressing against her, not in anger but in expectation. "Because it is right," she whispered. "Because he cannot defend himself and someone must." The Alpha's eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that made her heart pound. He stepped closer, each movement precise, measured, yet full of a quiet power. Arya felt the pulse of magic around him. Something ancient and binding, like the forest itself, acknowledged his claim over all that moved within it. "You are fearless," he said, "and foolish. But I respect that." Arya swallowed hard. She wanted to run, to hide, yet her feet remained rooted. Something about him demanded recognition, not just of his power but of her own. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The rustle of the hunters returned, a reminder that danger still lingered. But before she could move, the Alpha's hand shot out, swift as lightning. He struck the attackers with inhuman speed, each movement precise, leaving them unconscious or fleeing in terror. The forest returned to an eerie quiet, the mist curling around the victor and the small figure clutching the puppy. Arya stared at him, breathless, her hands trembling. The Alpha, Kale, she would later learn, turned his gaze to her once more. "You saved a life tonight," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "And for that you owe me a debt." Arya's pulse raced. "I owe no one. I acted because it was right." Kale's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, and he took a step closer, the forest itself seeming to bend toward him. "And yet, by the law of the clans," he said, "the one who protects another without permission becomes bound to the protector. You will stay with me." Arya felt the words sink into her chest like cold water. Her mind screamed with disbelief, yet she could see the truth in his eyes. He was not cruel, but he was Alpha. Authority, law, and power radiated from him, unyielding and absolute. "I cannot," she whispered. Kale tilted his head, silver eyes glinting in the moonlight. "You can. You will. Hours from now you will be mine." Arya's fingers tightened around the puppy. Her world seemed to tilt on its axis, the night suddenly heavy with fate and magic. She did not understand how a single act of kindness, an instinctive desire to save a life, had led to this. Yet deep within, she felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, a connection that both frightened and captivated her. The Alpha extended a hand, not threatening but certain. "Come," he said. "The forest has judged your courage. The clans have witnessed your heart. You belong to no one but me now." Arya hesitated. Her instincts screamed for freedom, yet a strange warmth spread through her chest. She looked down at the trembling puppy, then back into the eyes of the Alpha, who had appeared from the shadows like a storm made flesh. And in that moment she understood. This night was only the beginning. The forest held its breath as she stepped forward, the mist curling around their feet like a tide. Above, the moon cast silver light over the clearing, marking the first night of a bond neither of them could have predicted. The Alpha's hand remained extended, steady and unyielding, and Arya felt the weight of destiny settle onto her shoulders. The puppy yipped softly, as if sensing the gravity of what had begun. Arya whispered to it, "We will be all right somehow." Kale's gaze never wavered, and a faint wind rustled the trees as if the forest itself agreed. Yet within his eyes, a storm raged, centuries of solitude, pain, and duty. And now, a new element had entered his life, a healer with a brave heart, unbound by fear, who would challenge him in ways no one ever had. As they disappeared into the deeper shadows of the forest, Arya could not help but feel the pulse of fate thrumming beneath her skin. The night was long and the dangers of the world vast, but she had faced one storm and survived. And soon, she realized with a mixture of fear and fascination that the greatest storm of all would be the one within her own heart. Cliffhanger. "You are mine now," he whispered, "and I will not allow anything to take you from me, not even yourself." Arya's breath caught. The forest seemed to shiver behind her, the puppy pressed against her chest, unaware of the world-altering choice that had just been made. Somewhere deep within, Arya wondered, could she survive the law of the Alpha and the man who wielded it? And somewhere deep within, Kale wondered, could he survive the presence of someone who dared to challenge the darkness inside him? The Citadel gates loomed, and the first step into their shared destiny awaited. The Citadel rose from the cliffs like a dark monument to time itself. Its walls were carved from black stone that shimmered faintly in the moonlight, etched with ancient runes that seemed to hum with power. Arya's heart pounded as she stepped through the massive gates, the puppy trembling against her chest. Every corner of the fortress whispered of centuries-old authority and secrets that few dared to uncover. Kale walked beside her, his presence immense and commanding. Each step he took seemed to make the stones beneath their feet hum, and his silver eyes never left her. She felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see not only her actions but her very thoughts. The forest behind them faded into mist, leaving her only with the shadow of the Alpha who had claimed her. "You will follow the rules of this citadel," Kale said, his voice low and steady. "And in return no harm will come to you. You are my Luna. That bond cannot be broken." Arya swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. She had grown up valuing freedom above all else, and now her freedom seemed like a distant memory. "And if I do not want to stay?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. Kale's gaze held hers unwavering. "Then you would be foolish. The forest would not protect you. The clans would not protect you, but I will." His words were like iron wrapped in silk, gentle yet absolute. "You belong here now, whether you like it or not." The puppy whimpered softly, and Arya adjusted the blanket around it. She could not ignore the warmth spreading in her chest as she glanced at Kale, part fear, part fascination. There was something more in his presence than power alone. Something deep, almost lonely, hidden behind the mask of the Alpha. Inside the citadel, the halls were vast and cold, but alive. Faint torches flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like spirits. Statues of former alphas and warriors lined the corridors, their eyes seeming to follow Arya as she walked. She could hear faint whispers as though the stones themselves spoke in silent warnings. Kale led her to a private chamber, simple yet elegant, overlooking the cliffs and the forest beyond. "Here," he said, gesturing to a small bed near the window. "You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow you will learn your duties. For now, rest." Arya nodded, but sleep did not come easily. She lay on the bed, the puppy curled beside her, and thought of the forest, of the life she had known, and of the Alpha who now claimed her. She felt a mixture of awe and fear, excitement and dread. Kale had saved her life, yet he had also taken it in a way she did not yet understand. The next morning, Arya awoke to a chill that seeped through the stone walls. The puppy was restless, pawing at her sleeve, sensing that something important was about to happen. She dressed quickly, tying her dark hair back, and opened the window to see the courtyard below. Figures moved with precision, warriors in dark leathers, training, sparring, and moving like shadows in sunlight. Kale entered silently, his presence filling the room before his shadow even touched the floor. "You will observe first," he said. "Then you will learn." Arya followed him down the corridors, her steps echoing against the stone. The warriors acknowledged her with nods, some curious, some wary. She noticed the way they moved with a fluid grace, a confidence born of discipline and danger. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were creatures of power, loyal to their Alpha, and bound by laws that few outsiders could understand. Kale led her to the training grounds, a wide open space framed by towering stone walls. A group of young warriors sparred in pairs, their movements swift and precise. Kale's eyes followed each one, noting their strengths and weaknesses, his mind calculating every detail. Arya could see the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, the burden of leadership, the solitude that came with power. "You will train," Kale said, his voice both command and invitation. "Not as a warrior, but as Luna. You must understand strength, loyalty, and the ways of the clan. Only then can you survive here, and only then can you stand beside me." Arya's stomach tightened. She had never been trained in combat. Her hands were skilled at healing, not fighting. And yet she felt a spark of determination. If she was to survive here, she could not hide behind fear alone. She nodded. Days passed in a rhythm that was both exhausting and enlightening. Arya learned the ways of the clan, the rules, the rituals, the subtleties of power and obedience. She observed Kale closely, noting the moments when he allowed vulnerability to peek through his stoic exterior. At night, when the training grounds were silent, he would speak softly to her, asking about her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Arya found herself alone with Kale in the gardens of the citadel. The puppy ran ahead, chasing shadows, unaware of the silent tension between them. "You are different from the others," Kale said, his eyes fixed on hers. "Most would fear this place, fear me, but you meet fear with courage." Arya looked down, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know if I have courage," she admitted. I just can't let the small or helpless suffer." Kale's expression softened, but only slightly. "That is both your strength and your weakness," he said. "Strength because it makes you brave. Weakness because it binds you to emotions that can be used against you." Arya's pulse quickened. There was a weight in his words, a truth she could not deny. She had always been guided by compassion, yet here, in the citadel of the Alpha, she realized that compassion alone was not enough. Survival required strategy, strength, and understanding power in ways she had never imagined. "You do not trust easily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have learned not to," Kale replied. "Trust can be a weapon as sharp as any blade." And yet, his gaze lingered on her, intense and unreadable. "I find myself considering it for you." The garden was silent, the last rays of sunlight casting long shadows over the stone paths. Arya felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of anticipation and fear. There was something magnetic about Kale, something that drew her in even as it warned her to stay distant. That night, Arya was woken by a sound, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. She opened her eyes to see Kale standing near the window, gazing at the moon. The puppy was curled at the foot of her bed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "You cannot hide from the bond," Kale said softly, as if sensing her inner conflict. "The law of the Alpha is not just about authority. It is about connection, trust, and destiny." Arya sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "And what if I am not ready for that destiny?" Kale turned to her, his eyes silver in the moonlight. "Then I will wait. But know this, time does not diminish the pull of fate. The bond has been made. Whether you accept it or resist it, it will shape both our lives." Arya felt a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to resist, to cling to the freedom she had always known. And yet there was an undeniable pull toward the Alpha who had saved her, claimed her, and yet seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. The night deepened, and the citadel seemed to hold its breath. Shadows moved along the walls, whispering secrets of old power, old rivalries, and old curses. Arya realized that she had stepped into a world far larger and more dangerous than the forest she had once known. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt a connection that was not born of fear, but of something far more complex: curiosity, admiration, and the stirrings of a heart she did not fully understand. The following days brought new challenges. Arya learned the intricacies of the Alpha's clan, the codes of honor, the rituals of loyalty, and the subtle displays of power that could shift allegiances in an instant. She witnessed Kale's leadership firsthand, commanding respect without raising his voice, moving through his people with a presence that inspired both fear and devotion. Yet even as she grew in understanding, she felt the tension between them deepen. Kale's eyes often lingered too long, his words carefully measured yet charged with unspoken emotion. And Arya, for all her focus on survival, found herself thinking of him at moments when she had thought only of the puppy or her training. One evening, a messenger arrived with a warning. A rival clan had been seen gathering at the forest edge, plotting to strike at the citadel. Kale's expression darkened, and Arya could see the weight of responsibility pressing upon him. "We must prepare," he said, voice low and commanding. "And you must stay close. The forest is dangerous, and those who wish to harm us will not hesitate." Arya nodded, her heart tightening. The bond between them felt heavier now, not just a matter of law, but a matter of life and survival. And somewhere deep within, she knew that the coming days would test not only her courage, but the fragile trust growing between them. The night was darker than usual, a heavy shadow pressed against the walls of the citadel. The wind carried whispers from the forest, rustling through the towers as if warning the inhabitants of something unseen. Arya could feel it in her bones, a tension that made her pulse quicken. She walked the corridors, the puppy padded softly at her side, unaware of the danger that lurked beyond the stone walls. Kale had not returned from the outer gate since dawn. Arya's heart ached with unease. Something in his absence felt unnatural. Normally, he would send a message or a guard to reassure her. Tonight, there was nothing, only the silence that pressed against the citadel like a suffocating cloak. Her thoughts drifted to the warning he had given. Rival clans had learned of the bond. The Alpha had not yet explained everything, leaving gaps that grew like shadows in her mind. Arya had learned to trust her instincts, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. A sudden cry shattered the quiet. It was the puppy, yipping frantically. Arya dropped to her knees, gathering it into her arms, and her eyes scanned the corridor. The doors to the courtyard were wide open. Panic surged. Someone had breached the citadel. Kale appeared moments later, emerging from the darkness like a phantom. His cloak flared behind him, and his silver eyes were sharp with warning. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low but filled with a power that made the intruders hesitate. Arya clutched the puppy closer, her heart hammering in her chest. Kale moved with impossible speed, intercepting the attackers before they could even step fully into the hall. They were skilled, but unprepared for his might. The clash of blades echoed against the stone walls, each movement of Kale precise and devastating. Yet one of them slipped past his defenses, a shadowy figure who lunged at Arya with a dagger. Time seemed to stretch. Arya froze for an instant, but instinct took over. Her hands moved over the puppy, over herself, and a warmth radiated from her in a soft, protective wave. The intruder faltered mid-lunge as though something invisible held him back. He stumbled, cursed under his breath, and retreated. Kale's eyes widened slightly. He had felt the surge of power. He had not expected it, not fully. And yet, he did not question it aloud. For now, the threat was gone, but the weight of what had happened lingered between them. Later, in the Citadel's training hall, Kale faced Arya with a seriousness she had rarely seen. The moonlight streamed through the tall windows, painting their figures in silver. The puppy slept quietly at their feet, unaware of the gravity in the room. "You have power," Kale said, his voice almost a growl. "Stronger than I realized, but power without control is dangerous. It can be used against you or against those you care for." Arya's fingers tightened around the hem of her tunic. "I didn't mean to," she began, then paused. "I only wanted to protect him, the puppy. I didn't know I could do that." Kale's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. "You are not like others. You think first of life, of empathy, and yet there is something deeper here, something I cannot ignore." The tension between them was palpable. Arya could feel the unspoken words hovering in the space between them, the pull of something more than trust or duty. And yet she also felt the distance that Kale's authority created, a reminder that no matter what, he was alpha and she was bound to him. The following day brought more trouble. A messenger arrived, bearing news from the border. The rival clans had gathered in force, preparing to strike at the citadel under cover of darkness. Kale's expression darkened, the weight of centuries pressing into his movements. "You must stay inside the walls," he said, but his voice carried more than command, it carried worry. "They will not hesitate to use anyone they can against us. The bond they know of makes you a target." Arya's stomach twisted. "Then I must fight," she said, voice trembling but firm. "If I stay hidden, they will take the lives of the innocent. I cannot do nothing." Kale's eyes softened, but his jaw tightened. "You are brave and reckless. That combination is dangerous." And yet he knew she was right. She could not remain sheltered. The bond they shared meant more than obedience. It meant connection, responsibility, and strength. That night Arya found herself at the outer wall, the puppy tucked into her cloak, watching the shadows of the forest. The wind carried voices, whispers of a world she had only begun to understand. And then movement, figures emerging from the mist, shadows with blades and intent clear in their every step. Kale appeared silently at her side, his presence like a shield. "Do not move," he whispered, eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Let me handle them." But Arya could not stay still. The instincts she had long ignored surged forward, stronger than fear. She stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly with the warmth of her power. The intruders faltered as she approached, a force they could neither see nor understand pressing against them. Kale's silver eyes widened, but he did not stop her. Together, they were a force neither the clans nor the forest had anticipated. Steel clashed, shadows fled, and in the midst of the chaos Arya realized something. She was not alone, not truly. Kale's presence, his trust, his bond with her, it was a tether, a strength she could draw from. After the attack, the citadel's halls were quiet once more. Kale led Arya to the top of a tower, overlooking the forest that stretched endlessly below. The puppy nestled between them, and for a moment they were silent, watching the moonlight dance on the treetops. "You are stronger than I imagined," Kale said quietly, his voice almost a whisper against the night. "But strength comes with cost. Trust must be earned, not given lightly. And I do not know if I can fully trust you yet." Arya looked at him, heart aching. "I understand," she said softly, "and yet I do trust you, even when I am afraid." Kale's gaze lingered, and for a moment the hard lines of his face softened. The Alpha, so often untouchable, seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. Arya felt a stir in her chest, a mixture of fear and longing, respect and fascination. The next days were filled with lessons and tension. Arya trained under Kale's watchful eye, learning not only to protect herself but to harness her growing abilities. Every evening brought them closer, every conversation a dance between caution and curiosity. She learned of Kale's past, the betrayals, the losses, the heavy crown of duty that had shaped him. And Kale, in turn, observed her with a growing intensity, noting her courage, her empathy, and the way her heart seemed unafraid even in the shadow of danger. Yet, trust remained fragile. Kale's silver eyes often lingered too long, and Arya felt the pull of emotions she did not yet understand. Every moment was a careful balance. One misstep could shatter the fragile bond between them. One evening, as the citadel slept under a pale moon, a shadow moved in the forest beyond the walls. Arya sensed it before anyone else. Her hands glowed softly, the warmth of her power reaching out into the night. Kale joined her at the tower, his eyes narrowing. "They are coming," he said. "The rival clans will not stop until they take what they believe belongs to them. You, the bond, everything." Arya felt fear twist in her stomach, but it was tempered by determination. "Then we fight," she said, "together." Kale's eyes softened briefly. "Together," he echoed, and for the first time Arya sensed a hint of vulnerability in the Alpha who had always seemed untouchable. The night of the attack arrived. Shadows moved like waves through the forest, and the sound of steel echoed faintly against the citadel walls. Arya's hands glowed, her warmth reaching outward, creating a shield that slowed the intruder's advance. Kale moved beside her, a storm of silver eyes and steel, cutting through shadows with precision. The battle was fierce, but their bond proved stronger than the fear or hatred that the rival clans carried. Side by side, Arya and Kale fought, their trust solidifying in the heat of battle. The puppy barked, small and fearless in the midst of chaos. And in that moment, Arya realized something profound. Fear could not bind them. Only trust, only courage, only the bond of heart and fate could. The dawn broke over the citadel, spilling gold and crimson across the black stone walls. The forest below was thick with mist, hiding dangers that had been gathering unseen for weeks. Arya stood at the edge of the tower balcony, the puppy nestled in her arms, and watched the forest stir. Her heart was heavy with anticipation, but also filled with a strange clarity. She knew that today would change everything. Kale joined her silently, his cloak brushing the stone floor, his silver eyes scanning the horizon. There was a weight in his gaze, a mix of determination, fear, and something that went beyond duty. The rival clans had attacked before, but today there were forces older, darker, and more dangerous. Forces that sought Arya's power and the bond that tied her to him. "You are ready," he said quietly, voice low but firm. "The bond, your courage, it will carry us. But you must trust me completely. No hesitation." Arya met his gaze, feeling the pull of something she had only begun to understand. "I trust you," she said. "Even if the world falls around us, I will trust you." Kale's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the intensity of his gaze remained. "Then let us begin." The first attack came from the forest shadows. Figures emerged like smoke, moving swiftly, their intent clear. They carried weapons, and behind them, the hatred of clans that had waited for generations for revenge. Arya's hands glowed faintly as she projected a wave of protective warmth. The attackers faltered, some staggering, others screaming as the invisible force pressed against them. Kale moved beside her, a whirlwind of strength and precision. His sword sang through the air, cutting shadows with exacting force. Each strike was measured, efficient, and devastating. The combination of Arya's emerging power and Kale's might created a rhythm neither enemy could anticipate. The puppy barked fearlessly, running between their legs, oblivious to the danger. Arya smiled briefly, a spark of warmth breaking through the tension. Even in chaos, life persisted. Even in fear, courage endured. Hours passed like minutes. The rival clans pressed forward, relentless in their assault. Arya felt the exhaustion in her muscles, the tension in her chest, but she refused to stop. She could feel the Alpha's trust guiding her, the bond between them a tether of strength and purpose. Every pulse of her energy was amplified by the connection she shared with Kale, and together, they pushed the attackers back. Then from the mist, a figure appeared, tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that glowed faintly red. This was no ordinary enemy. Arya felt a shiver run down her spine. The power radiating from this figure was ancient, primal, and dangerous. Kale's hand tightened around his sword. "Stay close," he said, voice low, warning but not harsh. "This one is not like the others. Do not underestimate them." Arya nodded, her hands glowing brighter. She could feel her power responding instinctively, as if recognizing the threat before her mind could comprehend it. The figure moved with unnatural grace, cutting through the remaining attackers like a shadow of death. The battle escalated. Arya and Kale moved as one, a harmony of strength and heart. Kale's sword carved paths through the shadows, while Arya's warmth and light protected allies and struck fear into their enemies. The citadel itself seemed to respond, the ancient stones vibrating with energy, as if acknowledging the bond between Alpha and Luna. And then the shadowy figure focused entirely on Arya. A wave of darkness surged toward her, and she felt herself pushed back, unable to counter with her own energy. Her heart raced, fear clawing at her chest. She realized with a sudden clarity that she could not protect herself alone. She needed Kale, and he needed her. Kale stepped forward, his presence radiating authority and power. "You will not harm her," he roared, his voice carrying over the battlefield. The ground beneath his feet trembled, the energy of the Alpha spilling outward in a wave that struck the enemy with force. The shadow figure faltered but did not retreat. Kale turned to Arya, silver eyes blazing. "Together," he shouted. "We fight together." Arya took a deep breath, drawing on every lesson, every ounce of courage she had learned. Their hands brushed, and the bond between them flared, a tangible connection, a pulse of energy that flowed through both of them. The warmth in her hands and the strength in his arms merged, creating a force that neither enemy nor shadow could withstand. With a final, resounding strike, the shadow figure was thrown back into the mist. The remaining attackers, witnessing the display of combined power, scattered into the forest, unwilling or unable to face such unity. The citadel was safe for now. Breathless, Arya and Kale stood side by side, the puppy running between their feet, oblivious to the aftermath. The moonlight reflected off their sweat-dampened skin, the silence after battle heavy with tension and relief. Kale's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice quiet but carrying weight. "Stronger than I imagined, not just in power but in heart." Arya's chest heaved. "I could not have done it without you," she replied softly. "Your strength, your trust, it guided me." Kale reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "No," he said, voice low, intimate. "You guided yourself. I only helped you see it." For a moment, the world seemed suspended between them. The bond that had begun in the shadow of a forest and a single act of courage had been tempered in fire and darkness. They had survived not just the enemies but the doubts, fears, and unspoken walls that had stood between them. In the following days, the citadel began to recover. The walls were repaired, the guards trained, and the forest watched silently from the edges. Arya continued to learn under Kale's guidance, mastering not only her power but the delicate dance of leadership, courage, and trust. Each lesson drew them closer, the bond deepening into something neither could deny. Kale confided in her, sharing memories of battles, losses, and the weight of centuries of duty. He revealed vulnerabilities he had never shown another soul. And Arya, in turn, shared pieces of herself, her fears, her hopes, and the quiet strength that had led her to face danger without hesitation. Through shared triumphs and struggles, the distance between them vanished. Trust grew into reliance, reliance into understanding, and understanding into a quiet, powerful love that neither had expected but both embraced. One evening, standing atop the citadel, the first light of dawn spilling across the horizon, Kale turned to Arya. The puppy sat at their feet, wagging its tail, unaware of the weight of the moment. "You have changed everything," Kale said, his voice carrying across the cliffs. "Not just for the citadel, not just for me, but for the future. The bond we share, it is stronger than any law, any curse, any enemy. It is ours." Arya felt tears prick at her eyes. "And I will never let it break," she whispered. "I will stand by you always." Kale took her hands in his, silver eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. "Then we face the future together. Whatever comes, whatever waits, we will face it as one." The puppy barked, as if agreeing, and Arya laughed softly, the sound echoing across the towers. The citadel seemed to breathe around them, ancient stones warmed by the energy of the bond they had forged. Weeks passed, and peace settled over the citadel for the first time in many moons. The rival clans had retreated, wary of challenging an alpha whose Luna had awakened powers they could not comprehend. Life returned to a rhythm, quiet yet alive, with Arya and Kale standing at the heart of it. Arya had grown into her role, not just as Luna but as a leader in her own right. Her compassion guided decisions, Her courage inspired warriors, and her bond with Kale became a symbol of strength, hope, and unity. Kale, too, had changed. The walls he had built around his heart, forged from loss and duty, had begun to crumble. The presence of someone unafraid to challenge him, to stand beside him, had softened centuries of solitude. He had learned to trust, to hope, and most importantly, to love. The final morning of their trials arrived. Arya and Kale stood on the cliffs where their journey had begun, the puppy frolicking in the grass at their feet. The sun rose in a blaze of gold, painting the sky in light that chased away the shadows of the past. Kale turned to Arya, his expression both solemn and tender. "The night tried to claim you," he said, voice low, full of awe. "The clans tried to claim you, but the moon, the bond, chose us both." Arya smiled, feeling the warmth of the words, the depth of their truth. "And I will honor it," she replied. "Forever." Kale drew her close, the bond between them pulsing like a living thing, and for the first time the world felt still. The forest, the citadel, and the distant mountains seemed to acknowledge what had been forged in fire, shadow, and courage. A bond not only of law, but of hearts intertwined, of souls awakened to love, trust, and destiny. And as the sun climbed higher, Arya and Kale stood together, side by side, the puppy at their feet, ready to face whatever came next. The night had tested them, the shadows had challenged them, but in the dawn's light they had claimed not only each other but the promise of a future stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and stronger than any darkness the world could send.